привет. Ну, пока нормально, да? Хорошо. Ну, у нас, смотри, я просто так тебя веду в курс дела. У нас, в принципе, я думаю, все, только людей выстраивают в огромные очереди в автозаке. И, знаете, подъезжает. Один автозак подъехал, в него загрузили. Еще один автозак подъехал, в него загрузили. В принципе, пока больше, я думаю, ничего не будет. Да, ну, слушай, это я вообще до завтрашнего дня еще могу стоять. Это вообще без проблем. Там главное, что я имею в виду, сигнальчик идет, мне просто ничего не придумать, куда еще встать, чтобы что-то было видно. Я так вдоль очереди походил туда-сюда. Вот. Я имею в виду, сигнал нормальный пока, все окей, да? А, ну это вообще хорошо. Давай, ладно, привезли красивый автозак, пойду снимать. Давай, Димон. Давай. Спасибо, Антон. Блин, у меня батарея умерла на... Роман? Не, на этом, на суперсвете. Я один момент чувствовал себя таким... Я так светил вам хорошо, мне так это было... Я просто помню... Спасибо. Через надпись «Нет войны», что ли, фотографируют, да? Супер, спасибо. Помнишь, у меня был такой свет, когда я включал на площади Ленина, когда за экологию было. Но я его боюсь брать. Только я сейчас мимо них пройду.
Где машина? Где? Я надеюсь, что связь по телефону. Звонил, где? Кто водитель-то где? На приеме. Я сейчас буду
Ладно, Антон, я иду туда.
Если он не понимает, то удаёт. Я, блядь, могу открыть. Да, надо шоу.
А Вікторія, дівчатки, покличте, Вікторія тут ходила.
This train brought hundreds of refugees to safety here in Austria. The United Nations estimates more than 800,000 people have fled across Ukrainian borders in just 6 days.
Felhívjuk Ukrajnából érkezett utasaink figyelmét, hogy külön vonat indul az első vágányról Budapestre. A vonat a szolidaritási menetjegye a belső igénybe. Köszönjük együttműködésüket. Szanowni pasażery, dowodem odwołaczono VIVO, що додатковий поїзд відправляється до міста Будапешт з першої колії. Дякуємо за співпрацю.
Ні-ні-ні, Маша. І туди. Ні, то там зайди. Ні, дякую.
második vágányon így közlekedik. Kérem a vágány mellett vigyázzanak. A második vágányon így közlekedik. Kérem a vágány mellett vigyázzanak.
Nem kell, a többit ennyi van még ott bal oldalt. Hány embernél járunk most már?
Mennyinél járunk?
55-ig mehet akkor. 38-at mondják, oké. God bless you. Gyere vele.
Димуля, пошли в автобус. Давай, тетю перезаручим. Это и ваша, наша вон будут сейчас выносить все.
Ügyes vagy.
Személyvonat indul, Nyíregyháza állomásra, 16 óra, 3 perckor, 13 perc múlva, jobbra a 4. vágáskor. A személyvonat Nyíregyházáig minden állomáson is megállóhelyeknek áll. A nyitott kocsiajtók balesetet okozhatnak. Kérjük ezeket a utastársai testi épségének érdekében a személykocsi ajtajai csukják be. Tisztelt utasaink, felhívjuk szíves figyelmüket, hogy a személyszállító vonatokon, valamint a vasútállomások és megállóhelyek utasforgalom részére megnyitott területén tilos a dohányzás. Tisztelt utasaink, felhívjuk szíves figyelmüket, hogy a vasútállomás utasforgalom részére megnyitott területén elektronikus megfigyelőrendszer működik.
Саша, бери дітей. Візьми когось за руку.
Most vagyunk többen. Jó, próbáljuk már meg egy picit megállítani. Egy picit nem kell. Gyorsan az, hogy kicserélődjük, ugye? Mondom, nem baj az, hogy eljárt.
Dorogi pasažieri, uvažiamo do vašeho výkona, sono na COVID-ui, nahajajte povinčadujete i staršoj poli,
Laci, ugye? Igen. Mindjárt kimegyek, szólok a...
Waiting for our passengers arriving from Ukraine that a special train departs on Central Platform. Trains were on the
Akkor azokat a csomagokat foglalkozom, hogy
Получилося, що одні супроводжуючі. Частина дітей пішла, її частина. Все, поки не вигружаємося. Все, поки стоп. Подождіть, поки стоп.
Мама, ти залишаєшся.
Так, ідіть біля мене. Все, поки стоп. Все, стоїмо.
Так, я пішла до всіх.
Ідіть. Зараз один автобус від'їде і другий загрузиться. Почекайте, хорошо? Будь ласка.
Можете посидіти.
Jó, akkor jó.
Egyelőre nincs több.
Jó, várj, itt várj. Mennyi idő még a második munkához?
Ez 1 perc szerintem körülbelül, amikor haladok.
Akkor jó, akkor mindjárt mehet tovább.
Скажіть, будь ласка, може почекаю тоді, всі документи заберу, а тоді вже поїду в другий автобус, почекаю.
Автобуси поїдуть. Всі чекають. Всі чекають.
Хочу забрати тоді вже документи.
Hölgy az egyik intézetnek a vezetője.
Igen.
El tudná nekünk mondani gyorsan?
Nem, én nem tudok. Nem
Nem ön, hanem hogy a hölgy el tudná nekünk mondani? Csak én nem tudok ukránul, azért kérdezem.
А вона
Що потрібно
хочуть вам з вами
сказати?
інтерв'ю.
Ну, давайте
Да,
трошки,
Україну
небагато,
буде.
да.
Ez nem baj, hogyha ön lefordítja.
Тільки перекладайте, да, що потрібно казати. Яке запитання?
A te véleményed.
Hívjátok fel innen a pályézolit, ő kim van a busznál.
Igen?
Hogyha
Szóval, hogy melyik
meglátja azt, hogy jön a
intézmény, melyik
busz,
városból, mi
áll
az
be,
intézmény?
akkor egyből mondja, és úgy lehet.
З якої організації?
Це Дарницький дитячий будинок-інтернат для дівчаток і Святошинський дитячий будинок-інтернат для хлопчиків. Це місто Київ, департамент соціальної політики.
Két kievi
Igen, de nem, még a busz ez
lány,
elmegy,
bentlakásos
és
lány
amint beáll, csak
otthon,
akkor
és
mehetnek a gyerekek.
бентlakásos fiú otthon.
Разом 216 чоловік, дітей і супроводжуючих.
216 ember összesen, a gyerekekkel és a kísérőikkel.
Hogy tudtak kijutni, hogy lehet ezt megszervezni?
Kezdjük el a következő brigádot is.
Як
Még
ви
nem állt be a
організували,
busz,
щоб ви
és van
виїхали
egy
з
10 gyerek,
Києва?
aki nem fog bemenni.
Ну, це мерія нашого міста і разом спільно із службою у справах неповнолітніх міською. Разом.
Ez a kievi városvezetőség együtt a kievi gyerekvédelmi hivatallal
Да.
szervezték.
І заступниця Кличка Марина Хонда теж дуже велику роль відіграла в цьому.
Amint a
És
busz
mindezt most ide
beér, beáll a busz,
Куди їхати тепер поїдуть?
azt kéne a
Діти в Ополі.
А це де?
vagy már ott van.
Ну, це Польща.
Це Lengyelországban.
Да, це Польща.
Дитячий будинок чи?
Ні, я так розумію, що це санаторій чи центри реабілітації, скоріше всього, і вони там отримають певну
Mikor ér be
допомогу.
a másik busz?
Проживання,
Nem egy
харчування.
gyerekotthon, hanem vagy egy szanatórium, vagy
Jó,
egy ilyen
akkor Attilának a
rekreációs
számát,
intézmény, ahol
Attilás hívja,
biztosítják az
amint
ellátásokat.
és beállt a másik, jó?
És csak a nevét is az intézménynek, hogyha elmondaná nekünk.
Останнє питання, щоб ви сказали ваше повне ім'я і назву ваших інтернатів. Да.
Я заступник директора з навчально-виховної роботи Дарницького дитячого будинку-інтернату «Цебрик» Вікторія Миколаївна. У нас тут присутній ще Святошинський дитячий будинок-інтернат і теж заступник директора з навчально-виховної роботи Хоменко Лариса Леонідівна.
Hát azt mondták 50 évet, csak 50. Onnan jön? Ez lehet. Jó. Folyamatosan jönnek. Nehéz vagyok tosztodik. Most megint úgy van, hogy... Mondom, nem megy tovább a valami. Jó, jöhet. Jöhet. Igen, várjál, ne szakjon. Öt ember jöjjön ide hozzám! Mindegy vámos rendőr, 5 ember jöjjön! Jani, álljatok már oda, mindjárt indul a vonat, leszálltak itt elő, nehogy aláessenek, jó? Nem kell, elég lesz, leszálltak a vonatról, mindjárt aztán ahhoz, nehogy aláessenek. Igen, mindenki. Itt vagy, gyere! És ezért kezdtük el már elvinni a fénymáson, ő utólag bedolgozhassuk, hogy emiatt nem elszedhetetlenek. Oké. Mennyinél tartunk? Persze. Ki van a... Erősen. Hívjátok már azt, hogy jöjjön a következő busz is befelé. Mi hamarabb, hogy induljon a harmadik busz is, és akkor az is álljon ide befelé. Jó, oké. Az a legegyszerűbb. Ne várjuk meg, hanem hogy jöjjön be kifelé, és mi hamarabb érünk. Mi lesz a félfaj? Ők is jönnek, mert nem csak most egyenlőre, hogy nekem legyen. Zoli, jöhet a másik busz. A harmadik busz. A harmadik jöhet. De futás ki.
Állomásra, jobbra a 4. Kérjük a beszállást fejezzék be, és a személykocsik ajtajait csukják be. Kérjük a vágány mellett vigyázzanak. Személyvonat indul, Nyíregyháza állomásra, jobbra a 4. Fejezzék be, és a személykocsik ajtajait csukják be. Kérjük a vágány mellett vigyázzanak. Személyvonat indul, Nyíregyháza állomásra, jobbra a 4.
Igen, beállt. Jön a harmadik busz, igen, jön a harmadik busz.
váltás vagytok?
Igen, igen.
Jó, oké, szuper.
Figyelj, nem, hanem én hamarabb figyeltek.
Jó, akkor mindegy, innentől kezdve kezdjük el feltölteni. Akkor innen a gyerekek hagyj jöjjön lefelé. Ha úgy van, onnan hagyj jöjjön lefelé. Ne szálljon le mindenki! Ne szálljon le. Innen vigyük elő. Jó, csak felolvon először nem így. Gyertek segíteni. Mondjuk keleti most jó vagyok, hogy piszkálgat. Már szerintem ezt most engedd el. Jön a búj. Gyere, láncba, csigába. Gyertek.
Se ne mana por unas.
Oké, mindjárt elszállok.
No problem, semmi baj. És?
Gyere.
Дима.
Fogjam meg, addig. Oké?
Ти бачиш, що робить?
Jó lesz így.
Dehogy a negyediken. Ukrajnából érkezett utasaink figyelmét, hogy külön vonat indul az első vágányból Budapestre. A vonat a szolidaritási menetrészet lehetőségében. Дорогі пасажири,
Я бачу.
відправляє на помісне Будапешт із першої колії. Для користування поїздом необхідно придбати безкоштовний білет солідарність. Дякуємо за співпрацю.
Waiting for our passengers arriving from Ukraine that a special train departs for Budapest.
Jelentkezőgép kísérjenek. Hol engeditek át a piroskát? Nem tudsz körbevenni, most állnak le, hogy kell sérülni.
Давай.
Чи на стоянке. Олег.
Давай. Давай.
Ты на стоянке
Давай.
падал и пил.
Давай.
Ты на стоянке падал и пил. Олег, ты на стоянке падал.
Давай.
Прямо на лед. Упал прямо на лед.
Давай.
Упал прямо. Говорила мне, ты держи меня за руку. Держи меня за руку. сказала мне, а мне прекращай. Держи меня за руку, я
Саша! Саша, Тома?
Szia! Hello! Halló? Vigyázz, érted, hogy hallod? Beül. Beül. Sofőr. Oké, de children sofőr. Érted, vigyázz, beül, children, érted, figyelj.
Спасибо. Солнце.
Положить на багажник, це прошу, бо не можемо вложити. Все, можна складувати собі, можна ставити речі.
Сколько людей?
А де Ольга є? Мама.
Автобус.
Асиет! Стой!
Где мы останавливаемся? Все, стоим. Остановись, Никита. Стоим. Никита никуда не идет. Стоим.
már bejebb az útról gyertek már bejebb.
Ти ж вийдеш.
А они всеми по-нашему разговаривают. Тихо! Но! Отойдите, отойдите.
Це їдеш ще туди, Сартун, ода ти
Денис, Богдан, сюда.
Okay. Hello, mi újság?
Мам!
Hello.
Куда ты пошел? Иди сюда. Куда ты пошел? Мамушка. Да.
Давай. Сидять. Іде, Ярослав.
Леша, поднимайся давай.
Яс.
Поднимайся давай. Давай. Артур, заходи. Сережа, заходи. Артем, заходи. Давай.
Lehet a túloldalt, nyitva van Attila. Túloldalt.
Давай, Максим. Давай, Артем, заходи. Заходи на свободное место. Давай, Серега. Заходи, Сережа. Давай.
ще буде автобус.
Ale jakoś ten telefon.
Dobra, słuchaj, bardzo chętnie
Kontakt dalej. Dobra.
Musimy
nekünk, hogy hova fogják vinni.
nie za bardzo, wiesz, my musimy chłopakami zapanować, bo chłopcy są...
Chwilę, to tylko on trzeba by zapytać, że dokąd trzeba byście przynieść dzieci.
Gdzie przewozimy dzieci?
Tak, tak, tak.
Do Nysy,
Miszába,
Głuchołazy i
Głucholáziba
Głębinów.
és Glembinówba. Ez mind a három az opolei vajdaságban van. Körülbelül 100 km-re, 150 km.
Okay, I don't have the time, because...
Ilu jest dzieci?
Ja nie wiem tego jeszcze. Nie wiem, ja muszę
tudja,
znaleźć
nem
koordynatora.
tudja.
Ja przepraszam
Kicsit
bardzo.
kaotikus a helyzet.
Thank you.
De lehet, hogy mégiscsak ki van számolva a 200 hely.
Tudja, hogy nem.
Nem?
40, chyba 50. Ja przeliczyłam Tu, tam wszystko powinno być załadowane. Tam gdzie zaczynam liczyć tam na autobus.
Wasze.
Trzecie. I don't have the time because
Dawaj, 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 brat. Kapatjon a bélyeg.
Так, мальчишки.
Mondaná, hogy kell mondani
Я останнє прошу всіх. Влад, Влад.
Так я спереди сижу, у меня сукачик.
Потом поменяем место. Потом поменяем. Сейчас здесь отъехать.
inside the country, including rising internal displacement, and another that responds to the needs of people crossing international borders to seek refuge in countries neighboring Ukraine. As we ramp up our efforts, it is essential that the safety and security of UN and associated personnel in Ukraine are protected in accordance with international law, and that humanitarian access to vulnerable people and communities is guaranteed. I call on all sides to uphold their obligations to allow freedom of movement of humanitarian personnel and to facilitate safe, rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief. I also urge the international community to mobilize in support of our funding appeals to address the needs of all those displaced by this crisis, as well as other vulnerable groups whose numbers will only grow as the fighting escalates. Mr. President, humanitarian aid is vital, but it is not a solution. It is simply treating the worst impacts of the conflict. The only true solution is peace. The attack on Ukraine challenges international law and the multilateral system rooted in the UN Charter. Some of the possible consequences of a worsening conflict are terrifying to contemplate. Regional tensions are rising. The latest security measures underline the high stakes for all. The economic repercussions of the crisis will have widespread impact, and I count on every member state to live up to the principles of the Charter. Mr. President, the guns are talking now, but the path of dialogue must always remain open. It's never too late to engage in good faith negotiations and to address all issues peacefully. I hope that the direct talks now taking place between Ukrainian and Russian delegations will produce not only an immediate halt to the fighting, but also a path towards a diplomatic solution. I welcome and encourage all peaceful efforts to end the bloodshed and halt this conflict. I thank the countries who have offered to host and facilitate negotiations. The United Nations is ready to support such efforts. Mr. President, war is not the answer. It is death, human suffering, senseless destruction, and an immense distraction from the real challenges facing humanity. The climate crisis and biodiversity loss, vitally needed socio-economic recovery from the pandemic, healing the divides of race and gender, and so many other pressing 21st century challenges. Humanity cannot afford to be locked in a mindset that dredges up the worst of past centuries. We need to look forward as United Nations to overcome the scourge of war. We need to focus on solving problems, not making them worse. In cities around the world, people are taking to the streets and demanding an end to war. People in Ukraine want and need peace, and I believe people in the Russian Federation do too. We need peace now. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for his statement. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Mr. President, Secretary General, for the first time since the United Nations was born, there is a full-fledged war in the center of Europe. Everyone in this hall and everyone in the world knows that Russia, and Russia alone, started started this invasion, now facilitated by Belarus. This war was not provoked. It was chosen by someone who is right now sitting in the bunker. We know what happened with the person who sat in the bunker in Berlin in May 1945. Before I continue with my formal statement, I would like to switch to Russian and invite you to put on the headphones, because I would like to read from the screenshot of the smartphone of a killed Russian soldier. That's an actual screenshot from someone who is dead already. Лёш,
Алёша,
ты как? Почему
how
так
are you
долго
doing?
не отвечаешь?
Why has it been so long since you responded?
Вы точно на учениях?
Are you really in training exercises?
Спрашивает мать убитого солдата.
Asks the mother of the killed soldier.
Моменты перед тем, как он был убит.
Before he was killed.
Мама, я уже не в Крыму.
Mom, I'm no longer in Crimea.
Не на учениях.
I'm not in training sessions.
А где?
Where are you then?
Папа спрашивает, можно ли
Papa is
тебе послать
asking whether I can send you a parcel.
Да какую посылку,
What
мама?
kind of a parcel, Mama, can you send me?
Что ты говоришь такое?
What are you
Что
talking about?
случилось?
What happened?
Мама, я на
Mama,
Украине.
I'm in Ukraine.
Тут настоящая
There
война.
is a real war raging
Мне
here.
страшно.
I'm afraid.
Мы бьем по всем городам.
We are bombing
Подряд.
all of the
Даже
cities
по мирным
together, even targeting civilians.
Нам сказали, что они
We
нас
were
будут
told
приветствовать.
that they would welcome us.
А они кидаются под нашу
And
технику.
they are falling under
И не
our
дают
armored
проехать.
vehicles, throwing themselves under the wheels and not allowing us to
Называют
pass.
нас
They
фашистами.
call us fascists.
Мама, мне очень тяжело.
Mama, this is so
In
hard.
several moments he was killed.
And this was several moments before he was killed.
Imagine, if you want to just visualize the magnitude of the tragedy. You have to imagine next to you, next to every nameplate of every single country in this General Assembly, more than 30 souls of killed Russian soldiers already. Next to every name of every single country in this assembly. 30 plus killed Russian soldiers. Hundreds of killed Ukrainians. Dozens of killed children. And it goes on and on and on. So just imagine those killed people next to you when you will listen to my formal statement. Big militarized powers seeking for geopolitical greatness has launched a full-fledged military offensive against a smaller neighbor aimed at invading the country. Deadly airstrikes dropped on civilians' heads across the entire country, and the Russian troops crossed Ukraine's borders from the territory of Russia, Belarus, and the occupied parts of Ukraine's Donbas and Crimea. Does it remind you of something, doesn't it? Indeed. Very clear parallels could be drawn with the beginning of the Second World War, too. And Russia's course of action is very similar to what their spiritual mentors from the Third Reich employed on the Ukrainian land 80 years ago. Just one, the most recent example of human sufferings, example of war crime. As all of us were on our way to the General Assembly today, the Russian army shelled with Grad multiple rocket launcher systems the residential areas of the city of Kharkiv, the second biggest in Ukraine. Innocent civilians have been killed and wounded. The exact numbers is very difficult to estimate because of the warfare, while the negotiations are still underway at the border with Belarus. We therefore express our gratitude for overwhelming support that made this decision on the emergency session possible. We are grateful to the President of the General Assembly for his taking care of this idea well in advance. We appreciate the engagement of the UN Secretary General, who has taken a very strong stance in support of peace, in support of the UN Charter. We have been prompted to call for an emergency special session as the level of the threat to the global security has been equated to that of the Second World War, or even higher, following Putin's order to put and alert Russian nuclear forces. What a madness. If he wants to kill himself, he doesn't need to use nuclear arsenal. He has to do what the guy in Berlin did in a bunker in May 1945. The Security Council addressed the issue of the Russian war against Ukraine, and the decision was not adopted due to the obvious reason. The country attempting to occupy Ukraine since 2014 has occupied the seat of the Council's permanent member since 1991. Therefore, we do not accept the Russian logic that the Security Council was unable to act due to one-sided and unbalanced approach. The only guilty party is the Russian Federation. Distinguished delegates, Russia uses all its military potential to attack Ukraine and has begun redeploying reserve units on the border with Ukraine. It fires cruise and ballistic missiles at cities, attacks with aviation, tanks and artillery, sends subversion and reconnaissance groups which mark residential buildings in preparation for the air attacks. Russia's missiles are now aimed at destroying the infrastructure objects. They targeted the radioactive waste disposal site near Kyiv, the fuel base in the town of Vasilkiv that is effectively a Kyiv's suburb. The objects of logistic infrastructure, including bridges, airports, and water reservoirs, remain among the targets. Such towns as Shastia and Stanitsa Luganska near Lugansk are now nearly destroyed, as well as residential buildings in and around Kyiv and Kharkiv. The Russian forces seized the Chernobyl nuclear power station and the part of southern Kherson region, including the North Crimean Canal. Due to the active moving of Russian heavy militaries through the Chernobyl exclusion zone, the radiation level has increased rapidly. In the Black Sea, Russian warships deliberately attacked two civil vessels under the flags of Panama and Moldova, approaching Ukraine. This constitutes a flagrant violation of the international law of the sea. Incredibly, one of the vessels had the Russian crew. Still, it was attacked by the Russians. Russians keep attacking kindergartens and orphanages, thus committing war crimes and violating the Rome Statute. Hospitals and mobile medical aid brigades are also targeted by the Russian shelling and the sabotage groups working in Ukraine's cities and towns. The Russian military fired on ambulance crews in the areas of Zaporizhia and Kiev. In Akhtirka district of Sumy region, Russian tanks shot down a bus with civilians. Later, the Russian military did not allow ambulances on the spot. As of today, 352 people, including 16 children, were killed on the Ukrainian side, and 2,040 Ukrainians, including 45 children, wounded during the first 5 days of the Russian invasion. And this number is growing non-stop. I have already told about the morning shellings in Kharkiv, and we cannot really estimate at this moment how many were killed. In response, Ukraine has activated its right for self-defense according to the Article 51 of the UN Charter. The Russian troops are suffering losses: aircrafts, helicopters, tanks, trucks, personnel. The aggressor forces have already lost more than 5,000 in manpower during the first days of aggression. Excellencies, the General Assembly should be vocal in demanding from the Russian Federation to stop its offensive against Ukraine. In recognizing Russian actions as an act of aggression against a sovereign and independent state, in demanding from Russia to immediately, completely, and unconditionally withdraw its forces from the territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, in demanding from the Russian Federation to reverse the decision related to the status of certain areas of Donetsk and Lugansk regions of Ukraine, in demanding full compliance with the provisions of international humanitarian law. The General Assembly should also be clear with regard to the treacherous role of Belarus and its involvement in aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. Distinguished members of the General Assembly, what is happening now in Ukraine has already had the security and humanitarian implications for all of you. Immediately for Europe, a bit later for the rest, including in terms of food security, energy security, financial markets, collapse of the economies. Last September, my president said, while delivering his statement at the high-level segment of the 76th session of the General Assembly, and I quote, "I understand that criticism of the UN is often heard, but we criticize ourselves," end of quote. If we fail to respond now, we will face much more than criticism. We will face oblivion. It must not happen. Now it is time to act, time to help Ukraine, that is paying now the ultimate price for freedom and security of itself and of the world. If Ukraine does not survive, international peace will not survive. If Ukraine does not survive, the United Nations will not survive. Have no illusions. If Ukraine does not survive, we cannot be surprised if democracy fails next. Now we can save Ukraine, save the United Nations, save democracy, and defend the values we believe in and that Ukrainians are fighting for and paying with their lives. The Russian delegate will speak shortly. Putin has done everything to delegitimize the Russian presence in the United Nations. But I wonder if the Russian presence in the United Nations has ever been legitimate. I wonder if ever this assembly voted in accordance with paragraph 2 of Article 4 on admission of the Russian Federation to the United Nations, either in December 1991 or in January 1992, or wherever thereafter. I want to ask the delegates whose countries voted for admission of the Russian delegation to the United Nations to raise their hand, to confirm that Russia was admitted to the United Nations according to the Charter. Please, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, please raise your hand if your country voted in the formal session of the General Assembly in reply to the letter by President Yeltsin dated December 24, 1991, when he told the United Nations that Russia would like to be a continuator state of the demised Soviet Union. Anyone? Shall I put my glasses if my vision fails me and I don't see any hand raised? Any country? Anyone voted for Russian membership? I leave you with that, and think about it when you listen to the Russian delegate.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
господин генеральный
Mr.
секретарь,
Secretary General,
уважаемые коллеги,
distinguished colleagues,
в последние дни украинский сюжет доминирует в информационном поле и занимает центральное место в Совете Безопасности ООН и
headlines, global headlines, and is now been given pride of place at the UN Security Council and now the General Assembly. At the same time, Russian actions are being distorted and thwarted, and there is the number of incredible fakes is staggering with the use with media outlets and social networks proliferating these lies. For this reason today I wish to focus on the real reasons for the crisis that has emerged and its possible consequences. I wish to emphasize the following. The root for the current crisis lies in the actions of Ukraine itself. For many years it sabotaged and flouted its direct obligations under the Minsk package of measures. Just recently, very recently, there was a hope that in Kiev they would reconsider and that they would indeed comply with what they signed on to back in 2015. For that, first and foremost, what was necessary was direct dialogue as set out in the document between Donetsk and Lugansk. However, the latest confirmation from the senior leadership of the country was that Ukraine was unwilling to engage in this dialogue, and they took unwilling to take steps to grant special status to Donbass, and as set out in the Minsk agreements, and this was actively supported by the Western patrons of Kiev, and this definitively persuaded us of the fact that we no longer have a right to allow the residents of Donbass to suffer any further. Insofar as Ukrainian provocations against the people of Donbass in February did not
Руководство ЛНР и ДНР
they
обратилось к нам с просьбой оказать
escalated.
военную
The leadership of
поддержку
DPR and
в
LPR turned
соответствии
to
с
us
двусторонними
with a request
договорами о
to deliver
сотрудничестве,
military support in
заключенными
line with
одновременно с их
bilateral agreements on
признанием,
cooperation, which were
что стало
arrived at
логичным шагом,
with their
являющимся следствием
recognition, concurrently with
непрекращающихся
recognition, and this was a
агрессивных действий
logical step
украинского режима.
to the ongoing, the persistent aggressive
Украинская
actions
власть,
undertaken by the Ukrainian regime, the
которую
Ukrainian
в последнее
authorities,
время
which
активно
has
вооружали и
of
подзуживали
late
ряд
been
государств,
actively
пребывало в
armed
заблуждении
and
о том,
incited
что
by
с
a number of
благословения
states,
западных кураторов они
were
могут
under the misconception that
добиться
with
военного решения проблемы Донбасса.
the indulgence of
Иначе
Western
сложно
patrons and sponsors, they would be able to address the issues in Donbass militarily. It is difficult otherwise. It would be difficult to explain the ongoing intensification of shelling and sabotage acts on the territory of the republics, which I mentioned. The people of Donbass and Lugansk continue to have to take shelter in basements. There was a flood of refugees entering the Russian Federation, and yet still the nature of the Ukrainian armed forces operation did not change, and yet Western partners did not turn a blind eye to this, and they merely echoed Ukrainian tall tales about the allegations that Donbass people were shelling on themselves. The worsening suffering of the residents of Donbass is something that has left Western sponsors unmoved in recent years. This discussion at the Security Council General Assembly, there was no empathy whatsoever, no compassion for the people of Donbass and Lugansk. It seems that these 4 million people simply don't exist for them. And as a result, the ongoing threats targeting the people of LPR and DPR, given the lack of prospects for addressing the problems in the area under the Minsk operations due to the failure to fulfill them, the Russian president took a decision for a special military operation to be carried out in Donbass. Occupation of Ukraine is not part of these plans. The goal of the special operation is to protect the people who for 8 years were subject to torment and genocide by the Kiev regime. To that end, there's a need to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. We further will strive to hold accountable those who carried out countless brutal crimes against the people, the residents, including residents of the Russian Federation. This decision was taken in line with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter with the sanction of the Federation Council of the Russian Federation. In pursuant of the Agreement on Friendship and Cooperation with DPR and LPR, I wish to recall further that the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity of states is something which we are being accused of breaching vis-à-vis Ukraine. The Declaration of Principles of International Law on Friendly Relations Between Peoples was adopted in 1970, and it needs to be unstintingly complied with respect to states, I quote, conducting themselves in compliance with the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples as described above, and thus possessed of a government representing the whole people, belonging to the territory without distinction as to race, creed, or color. End of quote. Today's government of Ukraine is no such government. Moreover, during the special military operation, Russia has been exercising its right to self-defense from a regime that has been striving to gain access to nuclear weapons. The president of Ukraine explicitly stated this on 18 February during the Munich conference, and this, I would recall, this statement that he delivered was met with applause by the participants of this conference. At the same time, Ukraine is seeking membership in NATO, where there's Article 5 in effect, and has territorial claims to the Russian Federation. Hence, by leveraging Article 51 of the UN Charter, not only is Russia protecting itself from the nationalist threat, but Russia is also seeking to uphold the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter on the soil of Donbass and Ukraine, ensuring that the main goal of the United Nations be upheld, namely to prevent succeeding generations from a scourge of war. Unfortunately, it behooves us to note the very negative role played in all of this by Western colleagues led by the United States. Instead of compelling Kiev to comply with its obligations, instead they are merely inciting Kiev, egging it on, repeating the senseless mantra that their obligations and the Minsk agreements are not being complied with the Russian Federation, which I should like to recall and emphasize, the Russian Federation is not a party to it. Moreover, our Western colleagues have shamelessly inundated the country with weapons, have sent to the country instructors and effectively incited Ukrainians who are facing a 120,000-strong military contingent, prompted them to engage in armed provocation against the Donbass. Thereby, the Western countries have created a bubble that cannot but pop. Distinguished colleagues, discussing today, in this discussion, it behooves us to note that back in 2008, the Russian president at the NATO Bucharest Council cautioned that members of NATO should think 3 times before proudly stating that Ukraine and Georgia will join NATO, and this was portrayed as some kind of a great compromise, which was immediately met with action plans undertaken in Ukraine and Georgia to join the alliance. At the same time, in 2014, there was a brutal anti-constitutional coup which took place in Kiev, as a result of which nationalists and radicals seized power, and their policy was to create an anti-Russia in Ukraine and to ensure that it joined NATO, and I will revisit that. For us, Ukraine joining NATO is a red line. First and foremost, from the military strategic level, the deployment of NATO infrastructure in that country would compel us to adopt measures in response, and this has placed us at the verge of conflict. For this reason, in December 2021, we proposed that agreements be arrived at with the U.S. and NATO for security assurances to be provided to the Russian Federation. However, our extended hand was unceremoniously rebuffed by Americans and NATO representatives. It was proposed that we continue to discuss secondary issues without consideration of our concerns. Moreover, the question was not addressed as to how the freedom of choosing alliances as set out in the OSCE aligns with the principles of indivisibility of security, which is of great importance to us. Probably many of you wonder what should be done now and what role can the United Nations play in addressing the Ukrainian crisis. We believe that the UN can and should play its role, help to bring the stakeholders' positions closer together and to eradicate the causes of conflict. The key role here, according to the Charter, should be played by and allies with the Security Council. However, attempts to calmly discuss this issue is something our partners did not deign to undertake. For this reason, the Russian Federation on 25 February voted against the anti-Russian and anti-Ukrainian draft resolution of the Security Council. It is anti-Russian, this document. There's no need to explain why. It suffices to have a cursory glance at the document. Why is it anti-Ukrainian, the document? Because this document, beyond any doubt, is inconsistent with the root interests of the Ukrainian people insofar as it is an attempt to salvage and to cement in Ukraine those authorities who brought the country to the brink of tragedy, and this tragedy has been ongoing for 8 years now. The main reason for our negative vote was not what was in the draft, but what was not included in the draft. If the sponsors were to attempt to make it even remotely balanced, then they would not have left out issues that need to be addressed in the context of the Ukrainian issue. Specifically, what was unaddressed was the way that the anti-constitutional coup in Ukraine, in Kiev, resulted in the Maidan junta seizing power and using it against the residents, shelling civilian areas with artillery pieces and multiple rocket launchers, and raining bombs on the people of Donbass and Lugansk. What was unaddressed was how the Ukrainian authorities, with the tolerance and indulgence of Western sponsors, consistently and cynically shirk their obligations to implement the Minsk agreement. At the same time, at the line of contact, Ukrainian death squads, first and foremost comprised of neo-Nazi and radical elements, methodically, day after day, shelled the residential areas of DPR and LPR, killing women, children, the elderly. This is ongoing today. How can we fail to mention the fact that the Ukrainian nationalists have been perpetrating crimes for all these 8 years? The protests protesters against Maidan in Odessa were burned alive. The peaceful protesters at the Maidan were shot out, killed by snipers. The investigation into these tragedies by the Maidan regime was deliberately swept under the rug. At the same time, the perpetrators in the Odessa tragedy are well known. They are flaunting their presence, and an alternative investigation into the reasons, into the acknowledgement by these snipers unambiguously emphasizes that the slaughter on Independence Square was a provocation by the leaders of Maidan. We specifically last year held an informal Security Council formal meeting on this issue in order to provide colleagues of the Security Council with more information about this. However, in response, at best, we heard from Western sponsors merely hackneyed cliches about Russian propaganda. What kind of a text resolution on Ukraine can there be in the above-mentioned circumstances? There's a need to ensure that the text, there was a need for the text to have a frank assessment of the role in inflating the Ukrainian crisis played by Western colleagues who not only were present in the Minsk negotiations, but effectively gave Kiev carte blanche to carry out any actions or steps that would be unthinkable for any civilized state. With tales being spun about the triumph of democracy in Ukraine, the Maidan authorities and nationalists engaged in, with impunity, murdering political opponents, persecuting opposition, shuttering opposition television outlets, where there could be some relatively objective information provided. 6 of those television channels were shuttered under Zelensky alone. And how could we fail to mention the fact that the country was flooded with weapons, which were then turned on peaceful civilians in Donbass? The responsibility for what is taking place right now lies at the feet of the current Ukrainian leadership as well as our Western colleagues. Today we wish to emphasize that this has been inflated by the lies, deceit, misinformation from the Ukrainian armed forces and the nationalist Western media outlets increasingly, shamelessly are portraying our military operation as a result, as a negative consequence. We constantly hear lies, fakes about indiscriminate shelling of Ukrainian cities, hospitals, schools, kindergartens. The Russian army does not pose a threat to the civilians of Ukraine. Is not shelling civilian areas in areas and cities where Russian armed forces have taken control, and these areas are seeing citizens living their lives normally. Basic infrastructure, transportation, local infrastructure, and law and order is being upheld. And this includes the electrical station, the power plant, which is jointly patrolled by Russian representatives and the special Ukrainian police who are present in the area. The Chernobyl plant is also operating normally. The threat to the residents of Ukraine presently is posed by the Ukrainian nationalists who have effectively taken hostage the residents of Ukraine, and they're using them, they're hiding themselves behind them and using them as human shields. There's abundant evidence from ordinary Ukrainians that nationalists, despite their protests, have been deploying heavy equipment and multiple rocket launchers in residential areas. This is an egregious violation of international humanitarian law, which needs to be duly condemned. Effectively, this is the same tactic that is being used by ISIL terrorists. All of the responsibility for the possible repercussions lies at the feet of the Maidan regime. The residents of Ukraine are also threatened by the unfettered, uncontrolled radical elements giving to all of those who wish, including criminals who have specifically been released from prison. They are now receiving weapons, and the looters and marauders and criminals are now using them to target civilians. There is sufficient and abundant evidence of this from residents of Kiev and other cities. This demonstrates the recklessness of Ukraine authorities vis-a-vis their women. Just now we received a letter from the Ukrainian human rights civic organizations, the Social Policy and Social Protection Institute, under the name of Irina Berezhna. For 8 years, this body has been informing international structures about how the neo-Nazism was born and proliferated in Ukraine, and how it has been and continues to be upheld at the state level. I briefly quote today, the apogee of the recklessness and lawlessness of neo-Nazis in Ukraine was that condemned convicted criminals have been released from prison. They have carried out grave crimes, murders, etc. Only in Kiev, those who are willing receive 25,000 machine guns without any documentation. Killings, looting, crime is ongoing. Those so-called territorial defenders of Ukraine shot at a car, killing parents and a young girl, 2 children are in hospital, critically wounded. The former acting president, following the unconstitutional coup in February of 2014, Turchinov, called on all citizens who are not indifferent to slaughter Russians throughout the territory of the country. And this, despite the fact that the most recent document for Ukraine in 2019 sets out that 16, almost 17%, and actually far more people are Russian there. Now, against the Russian Federation in social networks, an information war has been unleashed insofar as evidence of destruction of civilian infrastructure by a Russian military does not exist. Ukrainian attacks and accidental attacks bear out the fact that Ukrainian nationalists are carrying out this violence. Social networks have training manuals about how to create fakes to taint our military operation throughout Ukrainian social networks. There are 1.2 million such pieces of fake news, and the correspondence that was read out by the Ukrainian ambassador, that conversation that was read out is also part of these facts and these fakes, and this is well known. We also did not support the draft resolution for this issue to move from the Security Council and be addressed by the General Assembly special session today. We're guided by the fact that this measure proposes that we register that the Security Council failed to comply, to uphold its main responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and at the same time, there was not even a hint at an attempt to find a constructive solution at the Security Council. Attempts to circumvent the position of the Russian Federation, to disregard the position of the Russian Federation, runs counter to the very bedrock of the United Nations. There's a need to find common ground, regardless of our Western partners' attempts to avoid this, including when they disregarded our legitimate concerns in connection with NATO policy and Western countries' breach of the core principles of the OSCE on indivisibility of security. To conclude, Mr. President, I wish to state that the Russian Federation did not begin these hostilities. The hostilities were unleashed by Ukraine against its own residents, the residents of Donbass, and all of those who are dissenters. Russia is seeking to end this war. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iceland, Norway, Republic of Moldova, Georgia, San Marino, Andorra, Monaco, and Liechtenstein align themselves with this statement. Mr. President, I want to thank you for convening us here today, and for the Secretary General to be here, and for all of you colleagues being here. It's very important that the facts are heard and fully understood, and that this body is able to take the appropriate decisions after the fact that the Security Council, thanks to the veto by one country alone, stopped this Council from taking that decision. Let me start by expressing the European Union's full solidarity and support to Ukraine and its people, who are courageously fighting an unprovoked and unjustified military aggression from Russia. Since our meeting here in the General Assembly last week, the situation has dramatically escalated, despite tireless diplomatic efforts, including at the highest level. Russia has decided to turn its back to peace, to the rules-based international order as defined inter alia in the UN Charter, to diplomacy and to the international community. Russia's military attack against Ukraine has already caused an alarming number of deaths, injured, internally displaced and refugees. We condemn in the strongest possible terms the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by armed forces of the Russian Federation in violation of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity. We also condemn the involvement of Belarus in this aggression against Ukraine, and we call on both Russia and Belarus to abide by their international obligations. We're also alarmed by Russia's raising of the nuclear alert level. We call on Russia to de-escalate and to immediately return to the previous alert level of its nuclear arsenal and to avoid any actions that could risk the safety or security of the nuclear power plants in Ukraine, a non-nuclear weapon state under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Russia bears full responsibility for this aggression and the resulting destruction and loss of life. We demand from Russia to cease its military operations immediately and unconditionally and to withdraw all forces and military equipment from the entire territory of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. We further call on Russia to engage in earnest in dialogue with a view to a political and diplomatic solution. Russia's actions grossly violate international law and are in clear breach of the UN Charter and the OSCE Helsinki Final Act, as well as Russia's specific commitments to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity under the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. This is arguably the biggest aggression in Europe since the end of the Second World War. It follows similar Russian aggression against its neighbors in 2008 and 2014. We underscore our firm support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia and of the Republic of Moldova, and we are closely monitoring the situation in the region. This Assembly has a responsibility immediately and effectively to acknowledge and address Russia's actions. Failing to do so will erode trust to the rules-based global order with the UN at its core and the UN Charter itself. It would send the wrong message to perpetrators of such aggression and aggravate similar risks to other UN member states in the region and beyond. We stand firmly by Ukraine and its people. We deplore the loss of life and human suffering. This is a dire humanitarian catastrophe, and humanitarian needs are rapidly increasing. With the toll of IDPs and refugees rising, humanitarian support is a priority in the wider package of EU support offered to Ukraine in these trying days. The EU and its member states are providing urgently needed humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainian population. Ukraine has activated the Union's civil protection mechanism and is receiving urgently needed supplies from EU member states. In addition, the Republic of Moldova, to which more than 60,000 Ukrainians have fled, has requested and received EU humanitarian support in dealing with the human catastrophe caused deliberately by the Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine. We call on Russia and Russia-backed armed formations to respect international law, including international humanitarian law. Civilians and civilian infrastructures must be protected and humanitarian access should be secured. We call on Russia and Russia-backed armed formations to allow safe and unhindered humanitarian access and stop their disinformation campaign and cyber attacks. We strongly condemn the involvement of Belarus in this aggression against Ukraine and call on it to immediately stop action and to abide by its international obligations. We recall our unwavering support for the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, and we call on all UN members not to recognize the two self-proclaimed separatist entities. The EU has reacted swiftly and decisively to Russia's recognition of Ukraine's self-proclaimed separatist entities and the invasion of Ukraine by adopting restrictive measures. We intend to take such measures against Belarus. Mr. President, let us be clear on this. We firmly believe that the use of force and coercion to change borders has no place in the 21st century. Let us recall that the UN Charter prohibits both the threat and the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Tensions and conflict should be resolved through dialogue and diplomacy. The EU, together with like-minded partners, have been united in making unprecedented efforts to achieve a diplomatic solution. But Russia has not reciprocated these efforts and instead opted unilaterally for a grave and premeditated escalation. With this one-sided step, Russia is further isolating itself. We are today at a crucial and historical moment. Too many times in the past, the international community has been blind or too slow in front of unfolding tragedies. Entire generations in many places around the world, many of you representing them, have paid and are still paying the price of inaction. We cannot make the same mistake again. We have to take action. After Russia's veto in the Security Council last week, the General Assembly has the responsibility to send a strong and united message on the need for Russia to immediately and unconditionally cease its military operations, withdraw its troops, and opt for genuine dialogue. We call on Russia to avoid, in particular, any action that places the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear and radioactive waste installations at risk. The people of Ukraine and the whole world are watching us and counting on us, and will judge us on the decisions that we will take here in this special emergency session. And it's our duty and responsibility for all of us to do our utmost to defend the UN Charter and the international order. We therefore hope that this Assembly will massively support the resolution tabled by Ukraine and its partners. The EU and its member states will continue to do their utmost to protect the integrity of the rules-based international system, which is key to our collective security, and we call on all UN member states to do the same. On our side, we will continue to stand by Ukraine, support its democratically elected institutions and representatives and its people, including through additional political, financial, humanitarian and logistical support. I thank you very much, colleagues. I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Denmark on behalf of the Nordic Baltic countries.
I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 8 Nordic Baltic countries: Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Lithuania, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Denmark. Mr. President, on the night of 24th February, the Russian leadership decided to attack Ukraine. And let me be clear, we condemn in the strongest terms possible the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. People around the world are watching with horror the tragedy unfolding in Ukraine. A member state of this organization, a member of this community of nations. We are struck with a profound sense of injustice and a profound sympathy with the Ukrainian people who are fighting for their country, their cities, their homes, their families, their lives, their freedom and their future. The Russian leadership's aggression and brutal armed attack is in clear violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its international recognized borders. The Russian leadership's actions gravely violate international law and the principles of the UN Charter. They are an attack on this organization. And this cannot stand. Last week, the Russian leadership decided it will erase Ukraine's right to determine its own future. This cannot stand. Mr. President, Russia counted on the world to remain silent, but we are acting. And on this day, and until peace prevails and every Ukrainian can safely return to their homes, we stand with Ukraine. The devastating consequences of this aggression, not only for Europe but globally, cannot be overstated. Russian aggression against Ukraine will have global and long-term negative consequences, challenging the rules-based international order if we let it go unanswered. In the time ahead, we fear increased suffering, with potentially large number of casualties and extensive destruction of civilian infrastructure. We see fighting unfolding in and around urban areas, and we are deeply concerned about the long-term cumulative and protracted harm to the civilian population. Mr. President, we will continue to look at every single instrument in our toolbox as a matter of urgency. Sanctions have already been enacted to cripple Putin's ability to finance his war machine. And likewise, the role of the Lukashenko regime in Belarus in enabling the attack on Ukraine also demands a firm response. Nordic Baltic countries have been delivering financial, humanitarian and military assistance to the people of Ukraine. And many of our partners and friends around the globe have joined us. Every nation must look at how to further support Ukraine. Mr. President, during the days we have watched with horror broadcasted images of families separated, children sheltering in the safety of the Kiev subway system, kindergartens destroyed by Russian ordnances, and the ruins of bombarded residential buildings in the center of the capital of Ukraine. We are outraged by indiscriminate attacks on civilians in this unlawful and immoral war of conquest that serves no purpose and no principle but the naked quest for power and territory. This cannot stand. Russia must respect international humanitarian law and human rights law. Full and unhindered humanitarian access must be guaranteed. Civilians must be protected. We call on Russia to stop this senseless war, and we echo the plea of the Secretary General. We demand an immediate ceasefire, and we urge Russia to withdraw all its forces from Ukraine and return genuinely to the path of dialogue and negotiation. Mr. President, let me be clear. Every civilian death, every war crime will be recorded, and we will ensure that the perpetrators of these heinous crimes are held accountable and brought to justice. History has its eyes on us. Every legal avenue available will be used to hold the aggressor to account. Ukraine has sent a request to the International Court of Justice on Russia's erroneous and absurd allegations of genocide in Ukraine, which the Russian Federation has cynically used as a false pretext for its invasion. The International Criminal Court's prosecutor has also noted that he is monitoring Russia's invasion of Ukraine and has jurisdiction to prosecute war crimes and crimes against humanity. The prosecutor's office may and will exercise its jurisdiction over and investigate any act of genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crime committed within the territory of Ukraine, as Ukraine has accepted the court's jurisdiction. We fully support the ICC's monitoring of the situation. Colleagues, the rules-based international order, which governs how states interact with one another, was put in place drawing from the horrible lessons of 2 world wars, promising one another that future generations would be saved from the scourge of war. The attack on Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is a direct assault on the principles and purposes of the UN Charter. This cannot stand. The matter is now in the hands of the General Assembly, where one veto cannot overrule the UN membership, where the power and legitimacy is manifested in numbers. Russia's shameful use of the veto on a matter it bears full responsibility for is completely unacceptable. As a permanent member of the Security Council, Russia has a special responsibility for maintaining peace and security, not to violate the very principles of the UN Charter. The latest meetings of the Council demonstrated the need for reform. It demonstrated who had the firmness and valor to defend the UN Charter. No country can grow and thrive in isolation. Russia knows this. The General Assembly has the power to send a firm message to Putin. And what we say today and how we vote on the resolution presented will make a difference on the ground in Ukraine and to the Ukrainian people. They will be watching us, hoping that the world will come in on the side of the UN Charter and our promise of never again. Colleagues, Russia's unlawful and brutal armed attack on Ukraine will affect and impact everyone. And if we do not join our forces to turn back this tide today, we will be even less equipped to deal with similar crises and crimes in the future, wherever, on whichever continent they occur. Over the last week, we have heard powerful statements from representatives of every continent on this planet, from Africa to Asia, from Europe to the Americas, that Russia's behavior towards a fellow member of the United Nations cannot stand. And we will hear more today. And to those who still refer to two parties to a conflict, we echo the words of a protester who had written on her sign, "If Russia stops fighting, there will be no more war. If Ukrainians stop fighting, there will be no more Ukraine." That is the simple reality before us. That is the simple truth. The world will hold Russia and Belarus accountable for their actions. Russia as the main aggressor, Belarus as the enabler. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Denmark. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of France.
Monsieur le Président, la Russie poursuit jour après jour son œuvre de destruction en Ukraine. À ces actes brutaux et criminels s'ajoute une rhétorique dangereuse qui alimente davantage les tensions. La Russie conduit cette agression armée en violation des principes les plus fondamentaux de la Charte des Nations Unies que tous les membres de cette Assemblée sont dans l'obligation de respecter. Vendredi, elle s'est opposée seule à une résolution du Conseil de sécurité co-parrainée par 82 États. L'Assemblée générale porte aujourd'hui une responsabilité historique, celle de relayer haut et fort la voix des citoyens qui, sur tous les continents, et y compris en Russie, demandent l'arrêt immédiat de cette guerre et le retrait de l'armée russe du territoire ukrainien. La France soutient les efforts en cours au sein de cette Assemblée pour préparer une résolution demandant à la Russie de mettre un terme à l'agression et de respecter la souveraineté et l'intégrité territoriale de l'Ukraine. Elle appelle tous les États membres de cette Assemblée à voter pour ce texte. Au-delà de l'Ukraine, il s'agit de défendre la Charte et la raison d'être des Nations Unies. Soyons clairs, face à l'agression armée contre un peuple, face aux victimes civiles, chaque jour plus nombreuses, face au flot de ceux contraints de tout quitter pour chercher un refuge, nul ne peut détourner le regard. L'abstention n'est pas une option. S'abstenir, c'est consentir à la loi du plus fort. Nous appelons tous les États membres à voter pour la primauté du droit sur la force. Monsieur le Président, la saisine de cette Assemblée en session extraordinaire d'urgence ne signifie pas que le Conseil de sécurité renonce à exercer ses responsabilités. Il se réunira cet après-midi sur la situation humanitaire en Ukraine. La France y portera avec le Mexique un projet de résolution afin de garantir la protection des civils et un accès humanitaire sûr et sans entrave pour répondre aux besoins urgents de la population ukrainienne. La France et ses partenaires de l'Union européenne se tiennent fermement aux côtés du peuple ukrainien. L'Union européenne a déjà annoncé 90 millions d'euros d'aide humanitaire. La France prendra également sa part. Avec ses partenaires, la France est mobilisée pour que la réponse internationale soit à la hauteur de l'agression commise par la Russie. L'Union européenne, dont la France assume la présidence ce semestre, a notamment adopté des mesures visant à bloquer l'accès de la Banque centrale russe à ces réserves. Elle a également annoncé le financement de matériel de défense au profit de l'Ukraine. Monsieur le Président, la France salue le courage dont fait preuve le peuple d'Ukraine. Nous appelons cette Assemblée à lui exprimer sans tarder son soutien par l'adoption d'une résolution. Je vous remercie.
I thank the distinguished representative of France. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Secretary-General, Mr. President, colleagues. On Friday, 81 member states supported a resolution in the Security Council to stop the war in Ukraine. Russia was completely isolated in opposing that resolution. Today, we gather in the General Assembly to stand against Russia's illegal attack on Ukraine and its assault on the principles of the UN Charter. The facts are clear. Russia has invaded Ukraine without provocation and without justification. Russia has rained missiles and rockets down on Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, and other cities. The brave men and women of Ukraine are enduring the barrage and have held their cities from Russian invaders. They are fighting for their country, for their continued future as a free and independent nation. But the humanitarian consequences are already immense. We hear of babies born in air raid shelters, children with bomb craters in their kindergartens, and today, news of the shelling of residential areas in Kharkiv. These are indiscriminate attacks on Ukrainian civilians. 7 million Ukrainians are displaced. In short, the scourge of war that our United Nations was created to prevent has been unleashed by Russia on Ukraine. The international response to Russia's aggression has been united and swift. Around the world and here in this building, we must stand together to defend the rules and enforce the accountability that we have built together. If we do not stand up for them now, then the safety of every nation's borders and independence are at risk. That is why we also condemn Belarusian support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As the Secretary-General said last week, Russia's actions are violations of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and conflict directly with the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. And as he said today, the only answer is peace. So our message today is simple. We offer our unequivocal support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. We call on President Putin to stop this senseless war. And we urge all fellow members of the United Nations to speak up for Ukraine and to defend the Charter. Slava Ukraini!
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered by the representative of the European Union, and in my national capacity, I would like to add the following comment. Excellencies, we have gathered today in an emergency session because the Security Council once again failed us in acting as a guardian of peace and security. So now it is upon us, the General Assembly, where we all have equal rights to vote, to stand up and make it certain that the United Nations delivers on the purpose it was created for. The use of armed force by a UN member against sovereignty